welcome back to Grounded Haven. My name is Michelle. Today I was originally planning on shooting a harvesting video, but it has just been so hot outside and so humid. I just cannot be outside right now. I'm not complaining at all because living in such a hot place means that we have all of this beautiful food that we've been able to pick from the garden. We've been getting so much food from the garden these last few weeks, and today I figured I'm just gonna stay inside in the AC and we are going to be doing some preserving. So I've got a few different things here today. I have some eggplant, I have a ton of zucchini, I also have some tomatoes and a big bowl of green beans. And today I'm going to be doing a lot of freezing. Freezing is just one of my favorite ways to preserve things because it is so easy. You don't really need to pull out any special equipment, and I think it preserves the flavor and the texture of a lot of vegetables very nicely. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, and I'm just going to take you through the process and show you what I do to make things a little bit easier, and also my plans for these things, because once you freeze things, it does kind of change the texture when you go to cook it. And I'll just explain what I like to do and what I like to use these things for throughout the winter when I pull these out. So let me move all of this zucchini aside for now, and we'll come back to it later. And I think what I'm gonna work on first is this eggplant. I don't blanch my eggplant before I freeze it. I just find that it's not really necessary, and I like to cook with it just without blanching. So that saves me a step and makes it really quick and easy. So this is just gonna take like a few minutes. I've got zucchini falling everywhere. So this is just gonna take a few minutes for me to just slice up, and we'll place it on a baking sheet, and that will just knock one thing off the list real quick. So I've got a baking sheet here, and I just put a silicone liner. This just prevents it from sticking. And now I'm just going to slice up my eggplant. I like to slice my eggplant kind of on the bias so that they're like these really nice long slices. I just think it looks nicer, but you can just do normal rounds. And what I like to use this eggplant for throughout the year mainly is curry. I absolutely love Thai red curry with eggplant. That's probably my favorite way to use it because when you cook it that way, it's basically a soup, so the eggplant just gets really soft. It doesn't matter that it gets really soft because that's kind of how it's supposed to be. So that's pretty much the main thing I've done in the past. But to be honest, we've never really had a very good eggplant year. This is by far the best eggplant year we have ever had, which I am thrilled about because I absolutely love eggplant. I feel like most people I know do not like eggplant, which I think is such a shame because it's one of my favorite vegetables. And I only have 4 eggplants here today, but I have another 4 in the fridge that I'm just saving for fresh eating just because I am just enjoying the season so much having fresh eggplant because we just rarely have it. Normally our eggplants are covered in flea beetles and we just don't get a very good harvest, but this year has been really amazing, which I'm very thankful for. And I really love this variety of eggplant. It's an Asian eggplant, and unfortunately I don't know what the variety is called because the seed packet was not in English. But if you can see these slices, there are not a lot of seeds in here at all. So the texture is really good, and I find Asian eggplant to be very sweet, and it has that wonderful smoky flavor that other eggplant has, but it doesn't have any like bitterness to it. One of my favorite dishes that I've made recently with eggplant is just steaming the eggplant in these like batons, and I will cover it in like a ginger scallion sauce. It is so good. So anyway, I think it's been like 1 minute and I already finished up this eggplant. I'm gonna stick it in the freezer. We have a lot of freezing to do, so it's good to just get this one thing done and stick it in the freezer so that by the time I'm ready to freeze more things, the sheet tray hopefully will be ready to use again. And the reason I lay it out to freeze before putting it into bags is so that they don't stick together in the bags, and that way if I just need to pull out like a little bit for a recipe, I don't have to defrost the whole bag. So I do that anytime I freeze anything. I always flash freeze it on a tray, and then I will transfer it to bags later on. So let me run downstairs and I'm gonna stick this into our deep freeze. The next thing I'm going to work on is my mountain of zucchini, and I'm going to be freezing this in 2 different ways. I'm going to freeze some of it shredded or grated, and then a few of them I'm just going to freeze as chunks or slices. And I'm just gonna cut off all of the tops of this zucchini first, and then we will get to the slicing or grating. I have 4 different varieties of zucchini here, and they are all just so beautiful. They have all done great this year. So real quick, the varieties I have in case you're interested. This one is Golden Glory Hybrid. This one is Emerald Delight Hybrid. This one is an heirloom called Gray Zucchini, I believe. And then this one, I think is just called like Golden Zucchini. And this one's an heirloom as well. So I have 2 heirlooms and 2 hybrids, and I did 2 plants of each of those. And the reason I did that was to do a little bit of an experiment to see if production was better hybrid over heirloom, and my conclusion is that it's kind of the same. I was kind of surprised. I really expected the hybrids to do better, but in general, we have just had such a good zucchini year this year. I am just amazed and so grateful. And the reason we have so much zucchini here is that we have 8 plants, and we only have 2 people in our house, so that is a ton of zucchini. I know that a lot of sites say you only need to grow, I think, like 1 or 2 plants for a family. So 8 plants for 2 people, like I went a little bit crazy. But the reason I did that is because in the past, we have had such bad luck with zucchini. Like we would probably get 3 or 4 zucchini off of a plant before it died because the bugs would get to it. And this year, more than the variety, the thing that helped the most with my zucchini was just covering it with netting in the first month. I feel like that has just done wonders for the plants. And I mean, clearly you can see we've just had an incredible harvest. So yeah, I've definitely been preserving a ton of zucchini. I've already frozen, I think, 5 bags of shredded zucchini, a couple of bags of sliced zucchini, and I've also canned, I think, maybe like 12 pints of different kinds of zucchini, which I'll talk about in a bit because those are kind of new to me, and I'll kind of explain what I did. But right now I am just slicing some of this zucchini, and I'm going to place this. Actually, I think what I'll do is I'm gonna go ahead and grate zucchini first. I'm going to pull out all the skinnier ones because this will fit in the chute of my food processor without me having to do anything to it. And then these larger ones I'll probably have to quarter for it to fit. And I'm going to use my food processor just because it will obviously be much faster than doing it by hand. And it would also be very tiring to grate all of this by hand as well. So I think I'm going to do most of this grated because that's probably the way that we'll use it most. So let me get my food processor over. So I've got my food processor here with the grating attachment, and we're just gonna send all the zucchini right in here. It's gonna be kind of loud, so I'm gonna do this first and then I'll explain a little bit later on like what we're gonna use this for and yeah, all that stuff. So I've got this big bowl of shredded zucchini now, and what I'm going to do is portion it out into bags. So I'm going to label my bags first. I reuse all my Ziploc bags until they're basically unusable, which is why there is some writing on some of these, just because I do not want to go through a lot of single-use plastic. So anyway, I'm going to be weighing this out on my scale, and I'm going to measure out the exact quantity that I would need for a double batch of zucchini bread, which is, using the recipe, I use 340 grams. And I'll link the zucchini bread recipe I've been using. You don't need to like squeeze or drain the zucchini at all, which is great. So you can just defrost this and use it as normal. And this way, it just makes it really easy when it's time to use the zucchini. Instead of trying to measure it out when it's defrosting, because it would be kind of like a watery mess by then, and it's kind of hard to portion it out if it's frozen in like a bigger block than you need. This makes it way easier. You can just pull out one bag and know that it's the exact amount that you need. And I'm probably not going to be using all of these for zucchini bread. Shredded zucchini is also just great to throw in pasta, soups, or casseroles. You can kind of just put it in anything just to add some more vegetables to whatever you're cooking. But in case I do want to make zucchini bread, I'll know that each of these bags has the exact amount that I need. And then for like those other things that I mentioned, I'll just throw the whole bag in, and it doesn't really matter how much I have. I won't really care. So it'll really work for whatever I use it for. The food processor seriously makes such quick work of this. This would take so long if I was shredding this by hand. And with the food processor, it just took like 2 minutes. Definitely a great tool to have in the kitchen if you are doing a lot of food preservation. I highly recommend getting one. Just gonna squeeze as much air out of these bags as possible. And then I like to kind of like smush it and make it flat, and that way I can just layer all of these bags on top of each other. So I ended up with 7 bags today, which is pretty good. And I'm really excited to go into the winter with these because shredded zucchini is probably one of the easiest things that you can add to pretty much anything because it doesn't really have a strong flavor. And especially when it's shredded, it kind of just like blends into the texture of whatever you're making. So it just helps bulk up your meals a little bit and gets a little bit more nutrition in there. So there's our big stack of shredded zucchini. I'm gonna pop them in the freezer just like this because when I go to use these, I can just defrost one of these bags as one portion. And I just think they're so pretty, especially with like the mix of yellow and green zucchini. That is just so fun. So there we go, another task checked off the list. I did end up shredding most of that zucchini, so I just have one more left here that I'm going to slice, in addition to that one that I sliced earlier. And for this zucchini that I'm slicing like this, the main thing that I use this for is soups and curry. So I really like zucchini in green Thai curry, because for me, red Thai curry is exclusively pretty much just for eggplant. So I like zucchini for green curry, eggplant for red curry. I mean, obviously you can put either of those in either of those curries. In my mind, that's just how it works. Frozen zucchini like this doesn't really keep its texture very well. It does get very mushy because zucchini just has so much water in it. So it's really not very good for like stir frying in my opinion, because it just like gets really mushy. But if you put it in soups or something where it's supposed to get really soft anyway, it works out really well. So I don't preserve a ton of my zucchini this way because, I mean, there's just only so much soup we can have in the winter that we don't really need that much. But a few bags of it is definitely nice to have, and it's definitely like one of the quickest ways to put up the zucchini because slicing takes no time at all. So I've got another tray here. I just put this on a cutting board so it can fit on one of our freezer shelves, and this is gonna go in the freezer as well. So in addition to the zucchini that I just froze those two different ways, shredded and sliced, some other ways I've been preserving zucchini this year are I've dehydrated a bunch in slices, and those again I mostly use for soups because they do kind of get like a weird texture when you dehydrate them and then put it into a soup. So here I have some to show you of my dehydrated zucchini. So when you put this in soup, it does get like a little bit of a weird texture and it gets kind of chewy. It sounds really weird, but we actually like it. It's kind of interesting. You might not really love it, but I would say just try it. I decided to dehydrate this because even though it probably has like the same amount of shelf life as frozen food, like 6 months to a year, just in case any humidity gets in there, it doesn't take freezer space, which is great because I will need all the freezer space I can use. I mean, I'm pretty much already at like 75% capacity, I feel, with the vegetables that I've already put in there. So freezer space is definitely something that I run short of by the end of the season. So I decided to dehydrate some of that. And it's just nice to have your food in different kinds of storage just in case something happens, like if our power goes out for a long amount of time or like our freezer breaks. It's just nice to have backups in multiple different forms. Another way I've been preserving zucchini is by canning, which is a new thing for me. Like I said, in the past we have not had a lot of zucchini for me to preserve, but this year, because we've had so much, I've been able to experiment a lot with different methods, which is really fun, and I'm really interested to see which methods we like the most at the end, which are the best to eat. So I've done 2 different canning recipes so far for zucchini. I've done a zucchini relish and pickled zucchini, and it's kind of like a sweet pickle, it looks like. So those are 2 different things that I have done these past couple of weeks, and I think we're still like in the middle of zucchini season right now. What I preserved today is actually not even all of it. I still have 3 more zucchinis in the fridge, and we probably will pick 3 or 4 more today. So definitely still a ton coming in right now, and I will either can more of those 2 recipes or I'll try a different one. I've just been like flipping through the Ball canning book trying to see what else I can experiment with. And then hopefully this winter or next year I can update you guys and let you know which recipes we end up liking. But yeah, it's just been fun to experiment, and we'll see how that goes. So far the relish and the pickled zucchini do look pretty good, but we'll just see how much we like them this winter. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to process up some of these Roma tomatoes that I have. It's not going to be like a preservation thing. I'm basically just food prepping, but I already had my food processor out from shredding the zucchini, and I just gave it a quick rinse. And I am going to be making some pico de gallo, which is just like a fresh salsa, which is really good. And I made a batch the other day and we ate the whole thing in like one day. It's salsa and chips is probably just like one of our favorite snacks, and we eat a lot of it in the summer. So I have more Roma tomatoes to make another batch today. That's what I'm going to be doing. And I also threw in one of these purple Russian tomatoes just because I thought I needed a little bit more tomato in there. These Roma tomatoes are really good for fresh salsa, because they have a very low water content. And these purple Russians have a little bit more, so I'll probably just have to scrape the seeds out of them. But that's what I'm gonna work on right now. So the ingredients for pico de gallo are pretty simple. We have our tomatoes, I have an onion. I'm not gonna use this whole thing, but I am going to just slice it up and keep it in the fridge for the week because might as well do some food prep while I'm cutting that up. And you also need some lime, some garlic. You can do jalapenos, but we don't have jalapenos right now. They're still kind of small. So I picked one of our cayenne peppers. It's not red yet, it's still green, but I used one of these the other day in our pico de gallo and it was really good. It was very spicy. It is a cayenne pepper, which is very spicy, but it was delicious. So I'm gonna slice up my onion. This is not a homegrown onion, which you can probably tell because it is massive. But our onions actually are almost ready to harvest. I saw the other day that the tops are really starting to like flop over, and that usually means that it's about time to harvest. So pretty soon, I mean, if it cools off next week, hopefully I can go out and actually shoot a harvest video, and then we can pick a whole bunch of those onions. It'll be nice to see how those onions did out there this year because planting those onions was really a labor of love. If you watch that video, they were so tiny and it took a really long time, like a lot longer than I thought it would. I'm gonna start tearing. So I'm slicing these onions, even though I'm going to dice them in the food processor, just because I find that if you pre-chop it into smaller pieces, it does help for you to get a more even dice in the food processor rather than like sticking this whole chunk in there. You'll end up with really big pieces, and then the more you try and process it, other pieces will get like pureed and it's just not very even. So I think it's nice to just pre-chop or pre-slice. I'm slicing just because I am going to be putting most of this in the fridge. Having pre-cut onions is probably one of is so handy because I will just throw a little bit of this in everything, and I usually don't like to go through the trouble of cutting open a whole onion because they make me cry. So if I can just cry once for the next few days or for the week, then that's pretty good. So yeah, I think this is enough. Probably like a quarter cup of onions. Actually, I'm gonna set that aside first. And the first thing I'm going to do is puree the cayenne with the garlic. And I'm gonna do just those two things first, because those are two things that I really want to be very fine. I don't want a big chunk of cayenne or a big chunk of garlic. Sorry if my face is weird. Everything is just burning right now. And I'm scraping the seeds out of the cayenne pepper too, because we just don't need it that spicy. It's gonna be spicy enough even just with the fleshy part of the pepper. And I'm gonna cut that up into kind of smaller pieces. So I've got one cayenne pepper with the ribs and seeds taken out, and I'm gonna put in a few cloves of garlic, and the one cayenne pepper is going to be plenty. It is crazy how spicy a single pepper can make things. So I'm just gonna puree the peppers and onions first. I wanna get it really fine. And then we can add in our onions. And then lastly, we're gonna add in the Roma tomatoes. You can see the difference here between how dry a Roma tomato is and then a normal tomato. I think I need to grow more Roma tomatoes They're not as interesting to grow as heirloom tomatoes, but they really are just so versatile and so good for salsa and sauces. So I want to make sure I don't over process this. I don't want like a complete puree. Just a nice small dice. And that looks perfect to me. I'm gonna add some salt and pepper. And then the last couple ingredients are some lime juice and some cilantro. This is cilantro that I froze from earlier this year. I think it was back in May. I just froze it in some ice cube trays with some water, and I've defrosted that. You can see there's a little bit of that water melted off, but I'm just gonna squeeze out as much of that moisture as possible. And we have some homegrown cilantro in our salsa as well. So I'm really glad that I preserved that cilantro earlier in the year, because there is no way that you can grow cilantro when it's 90 degrees out. And it's also just really nice having it like pre-chopped and portioned out. Because even if you like get a bunch of cilantro from the store, like I personally cannot finish a whole bunch of cilantro in a week before it goes bad. So it's nice to just have it prepped in these small like tablespoon portions, and then that's usually the perfect amount for whatever I need it for, and then it's just easy to throw in like that. So there we go, that's our finished pico de gallo or salsa fresca, whatever you want to call it. Either way, I think it's going to be delicious. I'm going to give it a little taste test right now. I think I could use just a little bit more salt. And this is a really nice thing to do a little bit beforehand, because as it sits, those flavors will meld a little bit better. And then, of course, you can chill it in the fridge and it'll be nice and cold. So we are definitely going to enjoy this as an afternoon snack later on. Alright, so I've taken a few minutes to regroup and clean up, because I cannot work with dirty dishes all around me. And the last thing I need to process today are these beans. We have a lot to go through. This is probably a couple of pounds of beans, and I think this is probably just from like the last 3 or 4 days. And what I'm going to be doing is blanching and freezing these beans, which is my favorite way to preserve them. So behind me I've got a pot of water heating up to boil to blanch these beans, and now all I have to do is snap them. Most of these I'm just going to snap in half. So when I pick my beans, I snap the tops off of them. So I'll just like push against the bean and that will snap the little tips off. I'll put a little clip on the side here to show you, because it saves a lot of time when I'm processing them if I do that one step while I'm picking, and it doesn't take any longer. It just all comes down to like your technique a little bit, and it speeds things up, because as you can see, all I have to do is like snap these into smaller lengths, and it goes really quickly. And so you have like the end that it grows off the plant, which has like that little nub that you usually have to take off, and then the other end is just the point, and I don't mind leaving that there. You can just eat that part. So that way I only have to worry about breaking these into smaller lengths, and then I don't have to fiddle with the tips of the beans, because I used to do that and it took so long, especially with the amount of beans I have here. Like if I had to go through all these beans every few days and like cut both ends off of them, it would be a nightmare. Yeah, this has just sped up my processing speed so much. So I have a few different kinds of beans here. I will show you. I have some rattlesnake pole beans. You can see these ones are really long, so these ones I'll usually snap into 3 pieces, like that. And then I also have a purple bean. We have dragon tongue beans. The dragon tongue beans kind of look like the rattlesnake pole beans, but they're a little bit yellower and they're kind of flat, whereas the rattlesnake pole beans are like rounded. And then I have Blue Lake bush beans. But I cook all of these the same. I don't do anything different. You can see I have mixed them all in. I'm just mentioning that in case you're curious. I think the most productive one is definitely the rattlesnake pole beans. Maybe it's just because you can grow more in the same amount of space, but also because they get so long, it's like you're getting 50% more bean. And they also produce over a longer period of time, and they're easier to pick as well. You don't have to bend over as much. But I think they are also the one bean that gets the most fibrous if you don't pick them in time, like if they get too big. So there's trade-offs to every variety. I always grow a mix of varieties just because I think it's fun. It's really nice to have all of those different colors, especially if I grew more of those purple beans. They kind of lose their color when you cook them, but you can still tell because they're a little bit darker than the green beans when you process them. Anyway, I've gone off onto a tangent about varieties. So let me talk about what I am doing today and how I'm planning on using these beans, which is probably what you're here for. So I'm going to be blanching and freezing these, like I said. I find that this is the best method to preserve beans, to preserve their texture. I don't can beans, one, because I don't have a pressure canner, which is the only way you can safely can beans unless you pickle them. So since I only water bath can, I can only pickle green beans, and I don't really like pickled green beans. If you love pickles, then you can try that. I think that's a great way to preserve them. They're also called dilly beans sometimes. But I kind of just like to keep my green beans plain. I like to throw them into, again, soups. Frozen vegetables are just so good to throw in soups because their texture doesn't matter as much. So we eat a lot of soup in the fall and winter using a lot of our vegetables. But I also like to saute frozen green beans, or you can cook them down in some butter with salt and pepper. That's really good. I will admit that frozen green beans, they do get a little bit mushy. Even if you blanch them, I find that they can be a little on the mushier side, so it might not be for everyone. But honestly, Aaron and I really enjoy kind of mushy green beans. I know it sounds weird, but we don't mind it at all. So that is the method that I have used for the last couple of years to preserve green beans, because if you grow a handful of these plants, you'll end up with a ton of beans. As I said, all these beans were only from the last couple of days. So I am basically doing a batch of blanched beans at least once a week. And while I'm sitting and processing these, I kind of just want to talk about my process of how I go about deciding what I'm going to preserve and how I'm going to preserve it. Since it's July right now, we are getting a lot of different vegetables that are coming in. I really have to decide what we're going to eat fresh and what I'm going to preserve. And the way I approach it is I think about something and I think, is there a way to reasonably preserve this where it's still going to taste good, or is it something that you can only eat fresh? And then if there's something like green beans where we don't mind the texture change when it's frozen, I'll go ahead and preserve those things, because fresh green beans are very good. We do like them, but if we like frozen green beans the same amount, then I think it's more worth my time to preserve these green beans and concentrate on the things that we only enjoy eating fresh. So for example, things like slicing cucumbers and heirloom tomatoes, those are things where, as far as I know, there's not really a great way to preserve them, or if there is, the quality is greatly diminished. So those are things that I really prioritize us eating fresh. And I always want to make sure that like on our menu plan for the week, I am really highlighting those things that we can only get seasonally and that we can't preserve for the winter. I think of it almost like an opportunity cost, because anytime you are choosing to eat something fresh, it just means there's something else that you cannot eat, because there's only so many meals in a day and there's only so much space in your stomach that you really have to be choosy about what you're choosing to eat when we are blessed with so much abundance. And I know this is like a great problem to have so much food, to be able to choose from what we want to eat, but really to make sure that we don't let this garden abundance go to waste. I think that it's very important to be able to make those decisions and decide between what you're going to preserve and what you're going to eat fresh. So that's just something that I think about these days with everything coming in, because what I've shown you today is only like a fraction of our harvest. If you've been following us on Instagram, you've probably seen, but our harvests these days have just been so much. Like, we have moved on to our jumbo harvest basket because our small one doesn't even fit our harvest every day. So yeah, hopefully that was not too rambly. Hopefully it was a little bit helpful to talk about, for you guys to think about, especially if you're like kind of newer to preserving and you're not really sure what are the best things for you to preserve and what's worth your time. Hopefully sharing some of my ideas of what I do and how I use these things is helpful. My pot of water is boiling now, and I'm just gonna start blanching my green beans in batches. Obviously, I'm gonna have to do a few batches, but I just dunk them in the boiling water for maybe like 30 seconds. And I've got a bowl of cold water to the side here. Once the beans start getting like a nice bright green, you can take them out and transfer them to the cold water. Some people don't blanch their beans and they just put them straight into Ziploc bags and put them into the freezer like that. I prefer to blanch my beans. I just think that the texture comes out a little bit better. They also look a lot nicer because you can see that they turn this like nice bright green color, and then putting them in the cold water kind of seals that color in really nicely. And I think that if you don't go through the blanching process, they kind of all get like a really dark green, and I just don't think it's as appealing. And I also just think that the texture is a little bit better if you blanch your beans first. It is like a small difference because, like I said, frozen green beans still are going to lose some of that like snap and crispness, but I do think that the little bit of like texture improvement is worth the blanching. So that's just what I do, but it's up to you. If you want to skip this step, you can try just freezing without it, or maybe you can do like some blanched and some without, and then you can see how you like it, if you can even tell the difference. Because if you can't tell the difference, then maybe it's just not worth this extra step for you. I mean, it's not a hard step, it just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of like setup, because you do have to get like a bowl of cold water, and then I'm gonna lay these out to dry afterwards. But I don't think it's that big a deal. I do really need to get like a spider though instead of this slotted spoon, because it just takes a long time for me to fish out all these beans. It would be much more efficient if I had a spider. If you do a lot of cooking or food preservation, I would highly recommend a very nice, high quality pot. I really love this pot that I have. It's from Eggplant, and it's probably just one of the best cookware pieces I own. I have one pan and one pot from Eggplant, and They are just the best things ever. They have completely just improved the way that I cook. And they're the things that I reach for most often. Like, even though this pot is a little bit on the small side for what I'm doing, like technically I could use a bigger pot and fit more. I don't care. I'll just like always grab this pot. It's the first one that I want to use because they're just so high quality. They are more expensive, but I think it's worth it. Eventually, I want my whole kitchen, I think, to be all clad. I just think that you can really tell a difference with their cookware, and I think that it's kind of underrated how helpful a high quality pot is. And I'll admit, I didn't think that it would make like a huge difference before I got this, but now that I have it, I can tell such a big difference because the bottom of this pot is so thick. It conducts heat so well and so evenly, and I can say the same thing about the frying pan that I have. It conducts so evenly and I get such good browning, even better than cast iron. Everyone says that cast iron conducts heat well and evenly, but I actually don't think that's true. I think my all-clad frying pan is much more even than my cast iron. There is a noticeable difference, and when you're doing a lot of like food prep and food preservation, having your cookware conduct heat very well is very important. It can make your job go a lot faster. So I know I've been talking about the frying pan, but for this pot too, it just conducts heat so well that my boiling water stays very hot when I'm doing this process. If I did this in my cast iron Dutch oven, it just takes a lot longer in between batches for my water to like stay up to that boiling temperature, and I kind of have to like wait in between. But for this one, because it conducts the heat so well, that even though the capacity of my pot is smaller, I think I'm still able to do this in a much quicker time without having that time of like waiting in between. So that's just my 2 cents about cookware. I know this became almost like an ad for All Clad, which it's not. But I think that if you are going to be doing a lot of food preservation, a lot of food prep, having the right tools will just help you so much, and I think it's so worth it. So for like my last 2 like birthdays or presents or something, I either gifted to myself or I asked Aaron to get me those 2 pieces of cookware, and I'm just gonna slowly build my collection that way because it seriously will change your life in the kitchen. So that went pretty quickly with all of my rambling. This is my last batch of beans in here right now, so I can probably go ahead and turn off the heat now, and this will just sit in that hot water for like 10 more seconds. And then all of my beans are just gonna sit in this water for a little bit, and then I'm gonna transfer them to some towels. I'll like pat them down, but then I'll let them air dry for a little bit as well, just to let some of that surface moisture evaporate out. Whenever you're freezing, moisture is the enemy. You want things as dry as you can get them. So I think that just like laying them out for a little bit helps me later on when I'm ready to lay things out on a sheet tray, and then I will go through the process of like putting them on that sheet tray to flash freeze first and then transferring them to Ziploc bags. So like I said, it is a few extra steps than just throwing them in a bag. It's just the way I do it. You don't have to do it this way if you think it's unnecessary. Just do whatever you think is best and whatever you think is going to help you use and eat your garden produce later on. So it's been an hour or 2. We took a little bit of a break for lunch, and now the eggplant has completely frozen, so I can transfer that over to bags, and then we can put the green beans onto this sheet pan. The green beans have just been sitting on their towel so that that surface moisture can evaporate for the last hour or so, so they should be pretty dry now and ready to be frozen. The eggplant is nice and frozen now, so they're not going to stick to each other as they freeze. And I ended up with just 1 quart since I am trying to enjoy a lot of it fresh. But that's going to be nice to have in the freezer. Now I can transfer all of my beans onto this tray and we are going to freeze those. It's probably best to do this in a single layer, but since these are mostly dry, it should be fine. I'm just going to try and spread it out as much as possible. I just don't have enough space in our freezers to have multiple trays in there, so I'm just gonna make the best of this. And I did this a few days ago and it turned out just fine, and it froze fine like this. Just remembered I also have that tray of zucchini that I put in earlier as well, and I'm gonna transfer those over to a bag now. I just use Ziploc bags for everything. I'm sure if you had like food savers or like some kind of vacuum sealer, that would last longer and kind of preserve the quality a little bit better. But we've been using Ziploc bags for the last few years to do a pretty significant amount of food, and I think it does pretty well even all throughout the winter. By the time it's like early spring, we're still eating a lot of the frozen food that we've preserved, and as long as you make sure there's like not a lot of moisture in your bag before it goes in the freezer, I think the quality is still pretty good. So here's everything I was able to preserve today. I have this whole sheet of green beans. I have 7 bags of shredded zucchini, which is 21 cups of zucchini. I also have a quart of sliced zucchini and a quart of sliced eggplant, as well as our batch of fresh salsa. I'm healing on the floor now so I can fit in the frame with all this food, and I look very, very short. Anyway, this has been a very chatty video, a lot more talkative than my videos normally are, but I've been showing a lot of stuff and not really talking too much about preservation in videos and about what we are doing with all of the food, so I hope you guys found this helpful. Let me know if you want to see more preservation videos like this in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.